Lovely good evening. Time now for the news summary. At 22 hours, we look at the headlines. An economist says the public debt distress coupled with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic remain a challenge for a developing country like Zambia. Owners of bars, nightclubs and casinos will have to notify the local authorities in writing by outlining measures put in place to prevent the spread of COVID-19. A government official in Tanzania has been giving details about the fire which swept through a school dormitory, burning to death 10 children. The National Association for Media Arts to award artists in recognition of their bravery despite the COVID-19 pandemic. With the details, my name is Luizia Nalupumbwe. The public debt distress coupled with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic remain a challenge for a developing country like Zambia. Currently, the economic emergencies that the country is facing come against a backdrop of high indebtedness. Trevor Hambai, an economist, has told Loyola News in an exclusive interview that government needs to come up with a workable debt repayment strategy in order to reduce the country's expenditure.
Because of where the country is in terms of the economy, is that we are financially distressed. Our fiscal position is very weak. One of the things that must happen is that we need to reduce our expenditure because we have borrowed more than we need. So the first budget expectation is that we must validate these pronouncements that we've been talking about, which speak to austerity, which is meaning that we have to reduce our expenditure. So if our budget was 106 billion last year, we expect that this budget must reduce. And that is the budget expectation that will speak to us having to take the right direction. The second aspect is that we needed to be able to put a stimulus package, which is put a lot more resources in trying to develop the private sector to invest in the economy, because that increase in the private sector is the one that is going to generate additional growth in the economy, which allows government to be able to collect taxes to support the operations of the government.
Meanwhile, Mr. Hambai says the newly discovered gold reserves must be owned by Zambians in order to keep the revenue generated in the country. He says this move will improve the country's reserves, reduce the rapid depreciation of the kwacha, and stabilize the economy.
But for this to happen is that we need to have a fund that supports these miners who are local to be able to invest into those mines, which is what is the usual problem, that the mines that we have, the local Zambians do not have the resources to be able to invest there. So as a country, we had needed to create an empowerment fund that is specifically designed towards having to support the miners that are going to work towards to do this, and then the resources will remain in the country.
The Jesuit Center for Theological Reflection, JCTR, says Zambia needs to diversify its economy in order to form a cornerstone towards economic recovery. The organization has welcomed the president's pronouncement during the official opening of the 5th session of the 12th National Assembly to diversify the country's economy to ensure stability. Innocent Ndashe, the JCTR program's manager, says Zambians must acknowledge the need for diversification to form a cornerstone on economic development so as to strengthen the country's economy. Mr. Ndashe adds that President Edgar Lungu should have clarified the challenges faced across different economic sectors and the government interventions aimed at supporting the country's growth. He was speaking in an interview with Loyola News today.
But possibly what then would have been helpful, particularly to the Minister of Finance as he's looking forward to present the budget, would have been to give an idea of how various sectors would have performed. For example, the multi-economic section or the economic zones that government has been actually formulating. I think we have a number of facilities that have been created in Lusaka and a few other areas. So you'd want to check how are the economic facilities contributing, for example, to job creation and a few other areas.
There has been a call for Zambians to embrace locally produced goods to allow for money to circulate within the country and contribute to economic development. Ivan Singoma, the Buy Zambia campaign founder, is impressed with the number of Zambians that are opting to buy locally produced goods. Mr. Ngoma is particularly happy that President Edgar Lungu, in his address to the 5th session of the 12th National Assembly, called on all Zambians to support locally produced products. Mr. Ngoma was speaking to Loyola News in Lusaka today. Zambia has recorded today a 90% recovery rate since the first cases of COVID-19 were recorded in March. The Ministry of Health says 12,990 individuals have recovered out of a cumulative total of 13,819 cases recorded since March. Kennedy Malama, the Permanent Secretary in charge of the Technical Services, was updating the nation on the COVID-19 pandemic. But Dr. Malama has warned that despite the high rate of recovery, the public should not relent in the fight against the virus by strictly adhering to all the health guidelines. He emphasized on the need for members of the public to present themselves to treatment centers as soon as they notice symptoms associated with the virus. Meanwhile, the country has in the last 24 hours recorded 2 deaths, bringing the cumulative number to 324. Dr. Malama says 1 death was recorded at Levi Mwanawasa Isolation Center and other at Kitwe Teaching Hospital involving male adults with underlying health conditions. The country has recorded 99 new cases out of 747 tests conducted. Mwine Lubemba Paramount Chief Chitimukulu Kanyantakamanga Sosala II says he declined to meet UPND President Hakainde Hichilema because his alliance partner James Lukuku insulted him. The traditional leader says Mr. Hichilema refused to distance himself from the insults unleashed by Mr. Lukuku. He says traditional leaders must be impartial but work with the government of the day. The Paramount Chief was speaking when President Edgar Lungu paid a courtesy call on him today at his palace in Mungwe District, Northern Province.
So even here I receive every evening. Yesterday I received Mr. Chanda, I think he was at PPP or something like that. I always receive even Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, but this time I declined because as opposition alliance, they had issued a statement against me saying the members are being ruled by a misplaced and wrong chief. And they failed to distance himself, whereas the Honorable Campbell distanced himself from that statement, which was issued by the chairperson, Lukuku. So when they wanted to make an appointment, I refused on the ground that I'm misplaced and wrong chief. So I can't deal with right people when I'm wrong person. So on that ground, I refused to receive Mr.
But the UPND says the party will not issue any statement regards the refusal by the Paramount Chief to meet its leader, Hakainde Hichilema. Charles Kakuma, the party spokesperson, told Loyola News in Lusaka today. Owners of bars, nightclubs and casinos will have to notify the local authorities in writing by outlining measures put in place to prevent the spread of COVID-19. And officials from the local councils will be mandated to conduct inspections for conformity of COVID-19 guidelines as stipulated by the Ministry of Health. Charles Banda, the local government minister, was speaking at a press briefing in Lusaka today.
proprietors will notify the local authorities in writing of intent to resume partial operations and outline measures to put in place to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Remember, I'm saying local authorities. I'm speaking to all local authorities throughout the country and proprietors of such facilities throughout the country. It will be uniform. We're not going to have regulations for individual councils different from the others. The second one will be that an inspection will be conducted by the public health inspectors to verify that the proposed measures are being adhered to. Our officers from the councils throughout will visit these facilities time and again to ensure that the proprietors do adhere to those measures which have been given to us through the Ministry of Health.
The local government minister says the proprietors of the establishments are advised to follow the provisions of the statutory instrument number 22 of 2020, the Public Health Regulations, and the Liquor Licensing Act number 20 of 2011. 3 hosts of festivals have been cautioned out of the 26 who were inspected for non-adherence to COVID-19 health guidelines. The hosts of the festivals in Ndola did not adhere to measures such as physical distancing, proper sanitation, waste management, and disinfection. Rebecca Mshota, the new public relations manager at the Ndola City Council, has told Loyola News that the hosts of the events, or rather festivals, have since been given recommendations on how to adhere to the guidelines.
The Ndola City Council has cautioned 8 bars and nightclubs for operating beyond the stipulated time in accordance with the presidential directives. The warning was issued after the Council's Public Health Department conducted a night operation to check compliance on Friday night from 23:30 hours to Saturday around 02 hours. The operation was undertaken to check on compliance with the new presidential directives that bars, taverns, and nightclubs may operate from 18 hours to 23 hours on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. The premises found operating beyond the stipulated time were issued with a warning notice. If the same premises are found operating beyond the stipulated time in the near future, legal action would be taken against them.
The operation was undertaken to check on compliance with new presidential directives that bars, taverns, and nightclubs may operate from 18 hours to 23 hours on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. The Foreign Affairs Ministry is considering engaging the Electoral Commission of Zambia on the possibilities of creating a platform on which Zambians living abroad can cast their vote in the next year's tripartite elections. Ambassador Charles Lombe, the Permanent Secretary, who is in charge of international relations and cooperation, states that creation of a platform to have Zambians abroad is important. Ambassador Lombe said this during the African Mission's virtual meeting on the diaspora policy. He encouraged mission abroad to make submissions in order to engage relevant institutions with a view of putting up measures in place. Meanwhile, Ambassador Lombe says Zambian missions play a critical role in the successful implementation of the diaspora policy. In international news, a government official in Tanzania's northwestern Kagera region has been giving details about the fire which swept through a school dormitory in the early hours of Monday, burning to death 10 children. Regional Commissioner Marco Gaguti has told Reuters news agency that the dormitory was housing 74 pupils, and when it caught fire, the pupils started fleeing, but due to the impact of the fire, some couldn't make it on time. The cause of the fire at the Byamungu English Medium Primary School has not yet been established. The fire started gutted one of the dormitories of Byamungu English Media Primary School in Itera village. Mbaraka Mahmoud, the village chairman, said villagers struggled to put out the fire and rescuers dug through the rubble and burnt iron sheets to find the bodies. A proposed law giving Boris Johnson's government the power to override part of the Brexit agreement with the EU has passed its first hurdle in the Commons. MPs backed the Internal Market Bill by 340 votes to 263. Ministers say it contains vital safeguards to protect Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK if negotiations of a future trade deal break down. But critics, including a number of Tory MPs, warned it risks damaging the UK by breaching international law. Although the government has a majority of 80 in the Commons, it is braced for rebellions in the coming weeks as the legislation received detailed scrutiny. Several prominent Conservatives, including former Chancellor Sajid Javid, have said they could not support the final bill unless it is amended, with a number expected to have abstained in Monday's vote. An Australian policeman has been suspended over the arrest of a man who was allegedly hit by a police car and then kicked in the head of an officer. The man, 32, was put in an induced coma and admitted to intensive care after the arrest in Melbourne on Sunday. His family has called for an independent investigation after footage of the incident went viral. Victoria Police said an internal unit was investigating. Melbourne has been under a strict coronavirus lockdown for the past 2 months. Police have been given unprecedented powers under public health orders to fine and detain people, but it does not appear that Sunday's arrest was related to a lockdown breach. The National Association for Media Artists is to award artists in recognition of their bravery despite the COVID-19 pandemic. The awards aim at encouraging the artists for continuity in creating content during its outbreak of the pandemic. Lottie Siame, the National Association for Media president, has told Loyola News that the awards will be given out next month.
Because of the COVID-19, a few people have been producing, some have been affected completely. Therefore, as an association, we've come up with another initiative where we are going to hold the recognition awards for the second edition, because we had the first one last year. But this time around, we know we'd love to have the ZAFTAs, but looking at how the year has been, it's not possible for us to have the ZAFTA awards. Therefore, we've decided to have a recognition award where we are going to recognize each and everyone who's braved the COVID-19 to go out there and produce. These artists who've continued entertaining us in our homes as we follow the guidelines on COVID-19. So the awards will be held in November at Mlungushi Conference Center, and details will be given to our members soon.
On that note, we end the news summary, but before we go, the headlines once again. The public debt distress coupled with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic remain a challenge for a developing country like Zambia. Currently, the economic emergencies that the country is facing come against a backdrop of high indebtedness. Trevor Hambai, an economist, has told Loyola News in an exclusive interview that government needs to come up with a workable debt repayment strategy. Owners of bars, nightclubs and casinos will have to notify the local authorities in writing by outlining measures put in place to prevent the spread of COVID-19. And officials from the local councils will be mandated to conduct inspections for conformity of COVID-19 guidelines as stipulated by the Ministry of Health. Charles Banda, the local government minister, was speaking at a press briefing in Lusaka today. A government official in Tanzania's northwestern Kagera region has been giving details about the fire which swept through a school dormitory in the early hours of Monday, burning to death 10 children. Regional Commissioner Marco Gaguti has told Reuters news agency that the dormitory was housing 74 pupils, and when it caught fire, the pupils started fleeing, but due to the impact of the fire, some couldn't make it on time. The National Association for Media Arts is to award artists in recognition of their bravery despite the COVID-19 pandemic. The awards aim at encouraging the artists for continuity in creating content during this outbreak of the pandemic. Lotus Yame, the National Association for Media president, has told Loyola News that the awards will be given out next month. Thank you so much for watching. On behalf of the entire production and news crew, my name is Luizia Nalupumbwe. Good night.